Welcome to the JSS Online. This is the first online event this year in 2024, and this is with Dr. Cynthia Cavalli. Today, a webinar is called Synchronicity and the Goddess of Meaning. I will introduce Dr. Cavalli, and she will herself tell about the webinar in a moment. Cynthia Cavalli is an executive leadership coach and organizational transformation consultant. Her education includes degrees in physics, business administration, and human systems. Her corporate experience includes nearly 30 years in aerospace engineering, project management, and strategy development. An avid student of Jungian psychology, she underwent extensive analysis and began incorporating the principles of synchronicity and symbolism from dreams and mythology into her coaching practice. Dr. Cavalli is passionate about the deep interconnectedness of all things and offers seminars and workshops, weaving together insights from complexity science and ancient wisdom traditions. She loves helping people navigate radical change through deep inner work. Over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Evie. Thank you all for joining me here today. I am so pleased to see so many on the call. Let me pull up my presentation here. Is it showing properly, Evie?
Better.
Yes, thank you, it is.
I've learned that it's really important to try to get a little bit better every day. Winning is awesome, but learning and getting stronger is even better. Plus, working hard and being brave teaches you so much.
Okay. All right. All right, so I realize I can't actually see anybody while I am sharing and looking at my notes here, but I'm so glad that you're here. And today I'm sharing something that is a work in progress for me. It is material that came out of my research on synchronicity. I was interested in synchronicity and complexity, and that's what I did my dissertation on. And these are not those findings. This is the kind of many years later, the way that the material has woven itself into my psyche. And that's what I'm sharing here today. So I'd love to hear your input, especially afterwards. If you have any thoughts, things come to you later, I'd love to hear from you about that as well. Okay. First, a little acknowledgement and gratitude for where we are and for the guardianship of the elements and ancestors without whom we would not be able to thrive and learn and explore. I am in Orange County. That's where my practice is. I'm in the traditional lands of the Gabrielino Indians. The material I'll be presenting is from the Western esoteric tradition. So it will have that, it'll be informed by those elements. My own worldview as well will inform my material and my presentation. I am an older woman of color. I was raised in the United States, but born in India. My parents were not Hindu. They were fundamentalist Christian, Protestant. And that informed a lot of how I grew up and how I processed the world around me. My background, as you heard, is scientific, but I came to Jungian mythological interests later, once I was an adult. Also a whole systems perspective. Also informing my perspective is that I'm an avid dreamer, and I have been a student of Robert Moss for many years, shamanic dream practitioner. So those are the aspects that inform my worldview. yours will be different. And so I invite you to use your worldview to look at how I'm presenting things and recognize that you might have a different perspective on it as well. Now, many of you will already be familiar with this background on synchronicity. Now, hang on a second. I'm going to move my slider. The term synchronicity was coined by Jung to describe an age-old phenomenon. So it's not as if he discovered it. Other ancient terms to describe it are the sympathy of all things, the common flow, the Tao. We'll talk about these later. This is how I came to study it. So that's how I'm going to start there. And then we'll move into more recent discoveries, you could say. Here is a succinct or summary definition that Jung used. It's for synchronicity. It's a coincidence in time of two or more causally unrelated events. They have a matching meaning. There's no chance that one caused the other. So when you have an inner event, such as a premonition, a dream, an image, and that is later matched in, or can be synchronistic, simultaneously matched by an event in outer reality, there's no way that one caused the other. There's a meaningful connection between them. So the example I like to give is my husband is a therapist. He was doing therapy with a man who was having difficulty in his marriage. He didn't seem to quite understand or grasp the nature of the problem. And in frustration, my husband threw his hands up and said, "Your marriage is like a car wreck." And at the moment he said that, there was a car wreck outside. And it shook them both up. Now, my husband saying car wreck didn't cause the car wreck, and the car wreck didn't cause him to say those words, but there was a meaningful connection there. So that's an example. In this case, it was simultaneous, but it's not always simultaneous. And as I mentioned, other descriptions are meaningful coincidence, the Tao, acts of creation and time, and things that like to happen together. And I share this because this is also part of my education in synchronicity. Jung recognized two ways that reality is ordered. One is causal, which predominated in the West. That's where I hit you, you hurt, or I trip over something and fall down. Those are causal connections. There are also acausal connections, which is predominant in the East. These are atemporal connections, interconnections, and you can detect them through patterns, equivalences, and through meaning. And these acausal phenomena fall across a spectrum. So on the one end, you have things that don't have a lot of meaning attributed to them. Things like natural numbers, radioactive decay. At the other end, you have transformative synchronicities, and in between, you'll have some simple, meaningful coincidences. So we're not going to go into any kind of detail about these different kinds of order, because today is about exploring feminine structure. So the details of these distinctions are left for another time. Now, I'm sharing this quote from Sir Francis Bacon on nature. He is considered the father of scientific method, and it kind of gives you an idea of how, and he was operating, I think, in the 16th century. Yeah, there we go, 17th century. He says, in order to learn any of the secrets of nature, one had to be aggressive. One had to put nature on the rack and wring the truth out of her. I think it's safe to say that this attitude towards nature has prevailed in the subsequent centuries and has caused a lot of damage and harm to nature, to animals, to our relationship with even each other, and especially to the feminine. So I share it just to offer that one kind of a bookend. And then here is another attitude towards nature. This is an alchemical woodcut. You can see See, despite that attitude, there was always a parallel compensating approach to nature, to this attitude of kind of reductionist materialism. In this picture, you can see the way the old alchemists saw nature as an elusive woman whom they groped after, blindly trying to understand her mysteries. This is so. Now, as a woman, this is not how I feel about nature, right? But I appreciate this attitude, this different attitude. I'd also like to point out that, you know, a lot of the thought leaders during this time were men. I mean, they were almost all men. Women had a different role. They played a different role. And so the feminine, which is in both men and women, had to express itself maybe through men, and because women were not that visible and it was pushed down. So that's an interesting avenue of thought for another explanation. I just wanted to introduce it here. Here is Jung's perspective. He says, in all chaos, there is a cosmos. In all disorder, a secret order. This image is the largest structure in the universe. It's a gigantic supercluster known as, does it have a name? It's known as the boss. The entire structure stretches approximately 1 billion light years across. And Jung is recognizing here this as above, so below aspect of nature, and the way that it is so interconnected and so complex. Here again is the central elements. Here are the central elements of synchronicity if you were studying that formally. What I appreciate about Jung's discussion is that he introduced this concept into scientific discourse in the middle of that kind of environment of rationalism and objectivity. That idea is that it's replicable by anyone, anywhere. It's a reductionist materialist attitude, and it's very thinking based. So that's what I was taught. And then over the years, I came to, the experience began to sink into my psyche and my body and my whole worldview. So I want you to allow yourself to feel these two different ways of experiencing reality. And I'm trying to create a bridge between Jung's conception of synchronicity and a more feminine felt experience of these same dynamics. So we're moving from a scientifically structured description of the phenomenon to a more body-centered feeling experience of this phenomenon. And what I've learned is that it's a real place. So let's go to the next slide. And this is, I'd like to share this quote from Werner Heisenberg. He is one of the founders, or he participated in quantum mechanics, and also was played a big role in the bomb and, you know, in World War II. He recognized the same organizing forces that have shaped nature in all her forms are also responsible for the structure of our minds. So while you're looking, I like the way this little video clip, it's a starling murmuration. I like the way it feels. The slide was put together by my colleague, Gary Bobroff, and it exemplifies in part for me what I mean by feminine structure. So before we proceed, I want you to put your feet on the ground and sink into your seat if you can, maybe shake away the weak. Take a few deep breaths and really maybe place yourself in the middle of this starling murmuration. Hippocrates says there is one common flow, one common breathing. All things are in sympathy. The whole organism and each one of its parts are working in conjunction for the same purpose. the great principle extends to the extremist part, and from the extremist part, it returns to the great principle, to the one nature, being and non-being. As I said, I feel like this exemplifies the essence of feminine structure. What that means is what we'll try to explore. So let me give you a little backstory. I began researching synchronicity, as I said, for my doctoral studies, and was introduced to Joe Cambry through an analyst friend. And his work on synchronicity and complexity were what really captured my imagination. And from that point on, I was so in love with this material. I couldn't wait to even daydream about it or fall asleep, because I knew, I would be dreaming about this. And during that time, during that research period, I came across a lot of criticisms of Jung's framework. And that people were saying things like it was overly complicated because it utilized a scientific perspective rather than starting with the foundational concept of the unus mundus, the one world. But I was too focused at the time. I had to really pay attention to, writing a dissertation and focusing in one area, not bringing the whole world in. Over the years, the implication of that synchronicity and the nature of reality, the implications it had for the nature of reality, began to really make its way into my being, you could say. And the role of feeling, the way that you feel, the way that you value, the way that you pull things together from a feeling rather than a judgment or a thinking place, began to take on greater prominence. So that's what I want to highlight, that as one of the pieces in this talk today. Now, here are some descriptions. I already shared the Hippocrates quote. The Tao is a good way of thinking of this structure of feminine order. There are meaningful connections, things that like to happen together. Here are some quotes from the Tao Te Ching. Tao never does, yet through it all things are done. This idea of non-doing action. The Tao is obscured when you fix your eye on little segments of existence only. Heaven's net is wide, coarse are the meshes, yet nothing slips through. And before we go further, just a reminder about the symbolism of God the Father and the Goddess. They're not two sides of the same coin. It's tempting to think of them that way. And there may be times when it's possible to explore certain aspects that have that kind of parity. But for this conversation, they are symbols of a different order. I also want to clarify the way I'm using spirit. I'll be using spirit and soul, or masculine and feminine. This is taken from Patrick Harpur's The Secret Tradition of the Soul. We're looking at them as metaphors for something. You could say, on the one hand, you have, and the reason I want to clarify this is because our culture is very spirit focused. Especially in the United States, where I am, that there's a lot of emphasis on spirit and spirituality. Also, keep in mind, I'm talking about the Western esoteric tradition. So I know that spirit has different meanings in other traditions. So, for example, I believe in Kabbalah that spirit can also be feminine. So that's a different system. I'm talking from this system. In this system, there's a focus on unity and asceticism and God, and this ascent and soaring above the world, on transcendence. It's direct and efficient, it tends to be puritanical, or it can be. That's one extreme. The soul, on the other hand, tends to be affirmative and not unity, but a multiplicity, this and this and this, nature and eros and feeling. It's interested in the descent and the depth and the darkness. Soul is interested in story and meandering and muddiness, messiness, stories, imagination, mythology, the paradoxical, the ambiguous, the both and. On the spirit side, there's reductive, it's more black and white. Now, we have both. We need both. And the integration is what's beautiful. However, in our culture, spirit has been emphasized to the detriment of soul. And so this is an opportunity to bring these together and find that dynamic tension again. They have to both be recognized. Let's see if I had more on my notes. So a few quotes about this. Keep in mind, we're talking about spirit and soul as symbols. Spirit flies and soars and longs for transcendence, to rise above the world. Spirit is a Puritan, like the ascetic monk or the purist scientist, turning his back on soul's messy illogic. Soul favors the circuitous route, the underworld. She's suspicious of purity, knowing reality is complex and muddy. Spirit can resent the way soul is always trying to hold him down or entangle him. Now, what's interesting is I had shared some of these distinctions with a friend, and he said, you know, he was an avid workout. He likes to work out a lot. And he noticed in himself these two aspects where part of him wanted to do more. You're to push, and the soulful part of him was like, we're good. This is good. This feels really good. We did the thing we came to do. Let's move on. And he was able to recognize this dynamic tension within himself. I think it's important for all of us to recognize this as well. So now I'd like to share a little bit about how I came to, the title of this talk is the Synchronicity and the Goddess of Meaning. So that is the name I gave to an encounter that happened for me. And it's a personal experience, but I think that it's one maybe people can resonate with. I'm guessing a lot of you have had encounters, either similar encounters or close. And I want to give credence to it. I want to recognize it as a real thing. It's taught me a lot. And so as I was analyzing my data, I came to experience this essence in a more visceral way. So wrestling with the data, I had tons of first-person accounts of life-altering synchronicities. They were all so individual, different. It was a struggle to identify common themes or anything resembling a scientific-ish conclusion. So I spent a lot of time doodling, diagramming, and, I found that my cognitive mind was no help at all, and was, in fact, kind of a hindrance. So I sat night after night, long past midnight, and my sweet neighborhood cat, we called him Mr. Meows, but he had adopted me. He would show up at the back door. This is really him. And he'd have a snack and settle himself next to my laptop, and he would lay a comforting paw on my arm and then doze off while I sat and waited for inspiration. And time just stood still in those moments. The neighborhood was fast asleep. And in that stillness, I realized it was full of beings or presences, or I don't know, someone's were there. And I found myself falling deeper and deeper. And I could even regulate how deep I went using the cadence of my breath. Now, many of you might be meditators. I'm not especially good at that. I do the shamanic dreaming. That's my version, you could say. But it was quite a surprise to find that there were the level of my breath took me to different places. And the deeper I went deeper and deeper. And there was a distinct someone there. And in order to experience her, I couldn't expect her to come. I'm calling her a her, but I had to wait without having any kind of agenda. And then I began to dream about her, and slowly through the images began to put together this idea that she had something to do with this feature of objective meaning in synchronicity, and that she was the goddess of meaning and representing the deep interconnectedness that Jung was talking about. Excuse me. Now, this is how she appeared to me. in a footnote in the book that Jung co-authored with Pauli titled The Interpretation of Nature and the Psyche, Synchronicity and Acausal Connecting Principle, Jung mentions his own encounter with what he describes as a god of meaning. So I felt like, oh, okay, I'm not completely crazy, but this is how this quality of objective meaning manifested for me. It was a personification that has been very, very helpful to me. It's easier for me to relate to a personification. And again, I'm not special in this way. I mean, it's true, each of us are unique and special in our own way. But I mean, this is an experience that is available to anyone. And now maybe personality type plays a part in the way it appears. But I would encourage everybody to pay attention and recognize if you've had an experience like this, to maybe take a second look and focus on it. It's possible for each person, I think, to develop their own relationship to this dimension of reality. And I really encourage it because it offers a feminine antidote to a counterpoint to the lopsided emphasis on masculine perspectives in our culture today. So I tried to diagram a little bit of where I think, the question comes up, why is this deep interconnectedness only apparent sometimes and not all the time? So synchronicities, for example, happen, and skeptics, even we who accept them in our skeptical mind, will say, why isn't this happening all the time? Now, for some people, especially if you're in a deep period of crisis or transformation, you may find them happening more frequently. But I think it has to do with the states of mind that I found as I was doing the analysis. So I have this picture of a tree, and really it could be multiple trees. And you can see there's the grass, and then way beneath is this mass of rhizome, this rhizomatic mass. I think this question of deep interconnectedness only being apparent sometimes has to do with the state of our attention. In the rational mundane state of mind, we all appear quite separate. That would be up here. We appear separate and not especially connected in any obvious way. But the more we move into deeper layers of reverie and contemplation, of meditation maybe, and even active imagination, you can go down into this realm where we can be dreaming, or as the alchemists recommend, awake even while sleeping. The world in that state of attention is very different and is far more interconnected than would appear otherwise. This rhizomatic image of trees does a good job of depicting that way, how we're separate on top, but underneath we're deeply interconnected. But it takes a different kind of attention, state of attention, to feel our way into this place. So let's see, I have here, I aligned it with frequencies, brainwave frequencies. And this is not exactly scientific. I'm using this metaphorically, but I feel like it's a helpful metaphor. At least it has been for me. You can see in the beta state, we have what we consider normal waking consciousness. And so I relate that to kind of above the ground there. You have in alpha states, a heightened concentration and visualization. These are all heightened. Then below this, you have theta, where REM sleep happens along with vivid dreams and insights. At delta, you have deep dreamless sleep and a loss of body consciousness. And then above and below beta and delta, you have, let's see, am I showing that? You can have deep meditation, spiritual insights, mystical experiences. This is actually, I think, the way to connect deeply with anything. I suspect these states below here are what are being accessed when people communicate with the dead, for example, or communicate with animals or plants. I suspect that's what's going on here, and I don't have actual data to back that up, but people I know who do communicate in that way, they describe going into different state of mind to access it. And also note that the rules of behavior are different for each state. Oh, I didn't mean to press that already, but here we go. So I'm relating this to Jung's psyche. So here at this level, you have ego consciousness. Here you have personal unconscious, which is where you have dreams happening. They're your dreams. It's your personal unconscious, not shared with other people necessarily. Then below that, you have the collective unconscious, which is shared with everybody. And then beneath that, the psychoid. And the psychoid is where psyche can influence matter. So that's where synchronicities often fall there. So it's not just pattern matching, but some mysterious way that psyche can influence matter, and things that otherwise seem inexplicable can happen in that place. And as I said, each of these states has its own code of behavior and rules of engagement. So something that is wrong at the ego level, you can do things in dreams that would be wrong in waking life, but they're not wrong in the dream state because what they represent is something different. So this is how I explain for myself why it appears that synchronicities aren't happening all the time. If you could be in this lower, deeper states, you can see the deep interconnectedness, and you can see a lot more of this meaningful pattern matching. And then up here, it may be apparent differently. It has to kind of come up through these layers and erupt into waking consciousness, and that can have quite an impact. So I want to emphasize here, let's see, how am I doing in time? I want to emphasize the two important tools of the feminine, which is imagination. And a good question to ask yourself is, what steals your imagination every day? What feeds it? I would say imagination and feeling are the two biggest important tools to this feminine approach, this feminine structure. What I find steals my imagination is having to hurry, feeling obligated, so that I will set aside what feels important to me to support my obligation, my sense of obligation. Rejection of the irrational or the non-rational. That happens a lot in our world. We will put more emphasis on a logical, rational, or supposedly rational thought process than a feeling one. Something just feels wrong, and we don't know how to articulate it, maybe. Over attention to the rational masculine structure. It's fine. I think we have to do that to survive in this world. However, we don't have to act to ourselves as if that's all there is. We can recognize, oh, we're only telling part of the story. There's more to the story. And I can take the time to feel my way into the rest of the story so that it becomes part of my reality and not the other explanation I provide in a sound bite, for example. And I'm thinking war is generally a failure of imagination of these kinds of values. This heart-centered action and contemplation is so important to the feminine approach. And that is something that men and women can both engage. And that is probably in a state of poverty in our culture today. So I think these are the essential tools of the psyche for living via synchronicity. See what else I have. I think they're also the tools essential for navigating synchronicity when you're going through it, or for apprehending other people's synchronicities when they share them with you. So I wanted to, my husband found this image. I love it. I feel like it accurately represents the way that the goddess feels. This goddess, let me just share a little bit about how I describe her. She started showing up, and I realized that this being was someone that been there all along. And I couldn't know her as a separate entity because I didn't understand how she was different than other goddesses. I didn't yet have the understanding of her nature that would be necessary to distinguish her from other goddesses. So I feel like she showed up wearing their faces or looking like them. And I was able to recognize her in them or as them. And only later, as I began to study this, did I become sufficiently aware of the nuance of meaning and its role in shaping the universe. Only then was I able to catch glimpses of her as a separate being. And it's fleeting. I mean, it's there and then it's not there. It disappears when I try to catch hold of it. What I learned is there are places that exist and are accessible only when your mind is quiet and your head isn't filled with what you know, and your heart is present and still and waiting. And I suspect that is where this goddess lives. That is where she appears as herself and doesn't have to take on another goddess's garb or face or expression to be seen. It is not a world of certainty or of known outcomes, of surety. It is a completely different place with different rules, different modes of action and being. And I wonder if perhaps she is now ready to make her appearance in our more normal daily reality. Perhaps we all will be privileged to play a role in birthing her here. So that is about all I have to present today. I want to share a quote from the Tao Te Ching that I feel exemplifies this being. There is something formless yet complete that existed before heaven and earth. How still, how empty, dependent on nothing, unchanging, all-pervading, unfailing. One may think of it as the mother of all things under heaven. I do not know its name, but I call it meaning. If I had to give it a name, I should call it the Great. This quote for me really exemplifies the mystery and the grandeur and the feeling sense I have about this being. This image, by the way, is from the James Webb Telescope. It's the Pillars of Creation. Something to think about. And this is a little bit about me. There's my email address in case you would like to continue a dialogue with me. I present these slides and this material in the hopes that it can become part of a larger dialogue about the goddess. And I was listening to Marion Woodman, her Sitting at the Well, I think is her book. I have it on audio. And she's talking about how it's time for the goddess to make her appearance back into the world. And I believe probably a lot of people are having dreams and experiences like this one. And I would love to hear from you if you've had such an experience or are experiencing this kind of encounter. And I'm curious to see where it takes us. That's all I have for today. I'll stop sharing here